Can we go on now? Hi there, viewers. Today, I'm joining a conversation with author C.J. Robinson. It's a pleasure to have Robinson featured on P English Literature. Welcome on the show, Robinson.
How are you, Peter?
I'm doing very fine. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's exciting. I haven't been a guest on a podcast in quite some time.
Oh, that's amazing to know. Robinson, reading through your book, The Moment of My Dying on Amazon, I find it quite, enthralling to me. And I'm curious to ask you how this book come about. I mean, what inspired The Moment of My Dying?
Well, the moment of my dying was, I believe, written in 2018. It
Oh,
was the second the second collection of poetry that I'd written. I just looked up the copyright information. The moment of my dying was written in 2017, and it was my second collection of poetry that I had written.
oh,
Um, I didn't have a lot of I didn't have a lot of uh, at the time. I hadn't quite immersed myself in that community of people yet. And so the first collection, which was a poetry novel called I Will Go With You. And then my second collection, The Moment of My Dying, which was a much shorter collection. You
mm,
can really see you can see the amateurishness, I suppose, of of my writing because I learned everything that I did in these books. I learned on YouTube. I
oh,
hadn't gotten involved in the Facebook communities at the time quite yet, and so you can really see the how much of a rookie I really was. But what brought it about was that I hadn't been brave enough to share my writing with very many people yet.
oh,
And I finally decided to join a to submit my poetry to somebody here in town. I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in the United States, and I finally got brave enough to submit my poetry to somebody here in town at the local community college
mm,
had that I heard was taking poetry submissions, and they accepted. I submitted three, and this is the publication. This is from 2016.
wow,
I submitted eight, and they accepted three of them.
wow, that's
And I
amazing.
remember calling my mom at 1 o'clock in the morning, crying because I was so happy that I had one of the poems I had written for her,
Wow.
and I called my mom crying at 1 o'clock in the morning. Don't ever call your mother crying at 1 o'clock in the morning because she's going to assume something terrible happened. And looking back, I should absolutely have handled that situation differently because it took me several minutes to get her calmed down. And then she was mad
Wow.
because I scared her.
Wow.
But I was just getting my feet underneath me, and that's what got it started was just kind of taking steps, real small baby steps to get my confidence up.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thanks for answering that. Yeah, for readers like me who haven't read The Moment of My Dying yet, without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we would expect picking up the book?
Oh, sure. It's The Moment of My Dying is a short collection. Um, I had plenty of reviews on Amazon that said it was a very good collection. It was incredibly deep. It was moving. It was thoughtful. But
Hmm.
my number one complaint was that it was just too short.
Oh, I think I
So
read that
it's
too.
available. Yes, it's available on Amazon through Kindle Unlimited. It's a 99-cent collection, which is why getting that type of feedback, I started writing longer collections,
Hmm.
which is my next collection is it's right around 60 poems, whereas the moment of my dying, I think, was something around 15. So I've added quite a bit of length to it.
Oh.
So if picking up the book, you can expect a short but uh, really powerful collection of poetry that explores my 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 sense of my sense of self and the coming to terms with my own mortality, the fact that I'm going to someday die and I have to come to terms with that.
Wow, that actually sounds
So
very
this book is my process.
wow, that actually sounds very amazing to me. I love the sound of that.
Thank
Now,
you.
with
Thank
that,
you.
I want to ask you my next question. You know, as authors, we'll all have different ways of reacting to feedbacks. And I'm curious to know your opinion about criticism. How do you react to, negative criticism of your book, if you've ever had one?
I've actually had several.
Oh,
When I first started sending poetry into publishers, I took a rejection, or if they didn't reply, I took that a little bit more to heart than I think I should have. My advice is don't take it to heart and celebrate every single. I would recommend a book by Monica Wood. It's called The Pocket Muse, and you can find it on my copy for around.
oh,
In her book, advises us to celebrate every success. Don't. So let's say I write a poem.
yeah,
That's a success. I need to celebrate that. Whatever I do,
yeah,
as long as it's healthy. So I write a poem. Most people never write a poem in their entire life.
absolutely.
So I'm one step ahead. I'm one step ahead of those people as far as the
Yeah,
poetry writing goes. And let's say I send it into a publisher. So that's another success. I wrote
yeah,
a poem, I sent it into a publisher. If I never get a reply, that doesn't matter. I can write another poem and send it into another publisher.
yeah.
If they send a rejection letter back, that's a success,
Mhm.
because yeah, maybe you got rejected, maybe I got rejected, but somebody read it.
Absolutely.
So the number of people that actually will write a poem, send it to a publisher, and get it rejected is, percentage wise, is a very small amount of people. So I encourage you to celebrate every single success.
Yeah,
Even a rejection is a success because that means somebody read it.
yeah. I love that
And that's
mentality.
something that, yep, and that's what gets me through a lot of the negative feedback. I get 1-star reviews on my books on Amazon sometimes. Granted, it's not common, but it does happen to me. And I can celebrate that because somebody read it.
Mm,
So, I mean, I write not only one poem, I write a collection of poems. I design the cover, I edit the content, I put it through the self-publishing process,
mm,
and then I actually get it up on Amazon for sale. Somebody buys it, somebody reads it, somebody checks it out on Kindle Unlimited, however it happens. Combine all those steps, and I'm in a very small percentage of people around the world that have actually done this process and completed it. And so that's a whole series of success. Not all success is measured in monetary gain.
absolutely. That's true. I love your perception to this. They're quite nice and educative. Now, I
Thank
want
you.
you to tell us a bit about your book, Who We Once Were. I'd love to know more about it. Could you tell us a bit about it?
Oh, yes. I have, here's a paperback copy
Hmm. Who
of
We
Who
Once
We
Were.
Once
Very
Were.
simple. Nice.
It's
Yeah.
another, exactly. I don't think poetry covers need to be overly complicated. So here's the back of it.
Yeah.
It's another short collection. I just started writing longer collections. Um, I wasn't sure how long they should have been in the beginning. I didn't get a lot of feedback on that. Like I said before, everything I did was on YouTube.
Mm.
And so this, you can see the back of it.
Yeah,
That's the entire listing of poems here.
yeah.
Uh, Who We Once Were doesn't follow so much of a theme. It's similar to the other collections that I've been putting out at the time. Um, it also reflects on like finding my own emotions and finding the strength to express those emotions without feeling the need to hold back or feeling any shame. I was raised in a family that taught me that you didn't really express any weakness. You didn't express your emotions. And
Oh,
so this whole process of putting my emotions on paper and actually distributing it and having people read it that don't have any idea who I am in my personal life,
mm,
that was really a cathartic experience for me. It was something that was not easy for me to do, but the more I did it, the better I felt about myself and my life and the direction that I was going. And it kind of became something I had to do. And so each one of these books is just a short collection, a small step towards a bigger goal, like a bigger, more complete direction that I was trying to go to with this new book that I'm getting ready to put out.
wow. That's quite alluring to know, and it's quite intriguing to hear about that. I'm also curious to know if you've experienced any challenges while writing your books. If there's any challenges you've experienced, I'd love to, tell us about the challenge and how you ultimately overcame it.
My biggest challenge through this entire process, I started writing when I was 15. I wasn't very good, but of course, all my and I never tried to improve myself. Until 2009, I was listening to NPR radio and I heard a poem. I don't remember the title of the poem, but I remember it was by Richard Selleck. And the radio host read one of his pieces of poetry.
Mm,
And up until that point, I hadn't actually been listening to other people very much. So from the 9 years between my when I was 15 and 2009, I'd been writing my own poetry, and I was kind of like, what's that fable? The emperor's new clothes, where everybody tells him that his clothes look really good because the tailor told everybody else that only smart people could see the clothes, and that's how he sold the king nothing, and the emperor ended up walking around the entire kingdom with no clothes
mm,
because nobody wanted to admit that they weren't smart enough to see his new his new clothing. And so I was kind of like that. Everybody told me that my poetry was good, and so I believed them. And so I went through that period of my life thinking that my poetry was good and I didn't have to make any improvements. So
oh,
my own ego and my own desperation and willingness to believe what people were telling me and the desire for acceptance for a
mm,
long time was probably the biggest challenge until
wow,
2009 when I heard that poem by Richard Selleck. And I realized that every single thing that I had written up until that point in my life was absolute trash.
wow,
And I still have those poetry collections that I wrote when I was a teenager and a young adult, and I can verify that they are still absolute trash.
wow.
And people might tell me, "Oh, don't be so hard on yourself. Don't talk down on yourself." It's important to be able to acknowledge exactly who you are and where you are.
Yeah.
And I know that that poetry was bad. It will never see the light of day, and very few people have read it since 2009. But it is important to acknowledge exactly where you're at. And I had a decision to make that day. I could either give up because I realized I wasn't a very good writer,
Right.
or I could start listening to other people and try to improve myself so I could be a better writer like them. And it took me a whole 3 days to make my decision. And then I wrote a poem called A Note to Richard Selleck. And it was a poem to him, basically acknowledging that he was a better writer than I was, and I wanted to improve.
Hmm.
And that's what started me on my process towards self-improvement. But it wasn't until 2016 that I actually got published in somebody else's book.
Wow.
Um, but it's always been me. It's always been me either thinking I was too good or thinking I wasn't good enough. They call that imposter syndrome, I believe. It's always been me, has been my biggest challenge. And
Wow.
just convincing myself to just do it. Learn how to do it and then do it.
Yeah, that's great. It's quite fascinating to know about your experience, your challenges, and how you overcame it. I was also going to ask you, I found your title and us to dust quite captivating. And I would love you to tell us a bit about that too. How does that come about?
Oh yes, absolutely. Let me see. Here it is. So this is on my Kindle Paperwhite, and so I'm not sure exactly how well this will shine through on camera here. Let me adjust the brightness real quick. Um, it was here. It is. So that is And
Dust to
Us to
dust.
Dust.
Yeah, collected poems.
Um, so I don't know exactly which book cover I figured it out on. I think I figured it out early on because this is the poetry novel and
Oh,
that has the tree on the
I'll
front
go with
cover.
you.
You can, if you're going to write poems and you're going to use other people's photos, you have to make sure that you understand copyright.
Yeah.
And something that helped me out so much was a website called pixabay.com, Pixabay. And on Pixabay, they have millions of photos that are free for commercial use.
Hmm.
And I always make sure to give credit to the person that first designed the poem. So, And Us to Dust is my personal favorite cover so far.
Wow.
And I found that photo on pixabay.com. I cropped it a little bit. I did some minor editing to it, but
Wow.
for the most part, that's the original photo. And I don't know exactly where I came up with the title, but I remember being really happy about it. I don't have the paperback with me, but on the
Yeah, I
back
know. I can
it
see.
says ashes to ashes and us to dust.
Hmm.
And what this book is about is killing of my old self.
Oh,
It's a change from like almost a self exorcism. It's a change from who I was into the person that I wanted to be. So it is a collection of poetry, people that affected my life, whether romantically or through some
oh,
sort of abuse as a child. Um,
oh,
there's a few poems in there about exes and women that I honestly love, but they just didn't work out. And
oh.
so there are a lot there are a lot of poems in here that deal with my addiction or the death of my ego, the death of my psychological self.
That's great. That's quite great and fascinating to know. Now, I want to ask you, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? What are the challenges you've encountered in terms of marketing your book? And what are the mediums you've utilized so far in terms of promoting your books?
Excuse me. Um, the self-publishing process is drastically different from the traditional publishing process.
Yeah.
because I like to be able to have control over my creative works. I
Mm.
don't really like to give them out too much. I'm fine with distributing poems to publishers in small amounts at three, four, five, maybe. Um, but I want to be able to have my own creative liberty without feeling having the risk of giving it up to somebody else's control.
Mm.
It's very important to me to be able to have control of that process. And so I know a little bit about traditional publishing. I know about the submission process, making sure that you don't want to send the same poem to a bunch of different publishers because
Yeah.
they have this thing called First North American Serial Rights. That's what it's called here because I live in North America. And that
Oh.
means that the person that accepts your poem or your short story, whatever you submit, has the exclusive right to distribute that
Mm. Yeah.
throughout the entire continent of North America,
Okay.
which means nobody else can distribute it at the same time. And so there's a little bit of a process there that you want to make absolutely sure that you don't mess anything up because then you can get in legal trouble. I love the self-publishing process. It's a lot more work. It is a
Oh.
lot more work, but I have full control over what I do, for better or for worse. I can't blame anybody else if it fails.
Oh.
Um, but at the same time, um, it's a lot more difficult, but it's also much less expensive,
Mm.
much less expensive. I can almost write these books for free,
Wow.
but it's very much time consuming. As far as marketing, I used to market on Facebook a lot, and at some point, Facebook decided I was spamming, and so they banned my account. So I've quit using Facebook. I don't want to start that whole process over. I already have an Instagram, which is ironically owned by the same company.
Yeah.
They didn't ban me off of Instagram. So I'm very slowly building up that marketing network as well. I had been focusing mostly on Facebook before, which kind of turned out to bite me in the butt a little bit because now I have to start my process over with all my followers on Instagram.
Absolutely.
I do have an author friend here in town. His name is John Rodell, and he agreed to write the foreword for the new book. I'm pretty much waiting on him to write the foreword for this new book. It's called Long Live the Lonely,
Oh.
which, by the way, if I can drop some contact information later, I I am offering um, review copies of that book for
Okay.
people who want to check it out.
That's good.
But mostly Instagram. I do some stuff on Snapchat as well, but I mostly focus almost entirely on Instagram, and I make sure to interact with other writers. I post my stuff. I make sure it looks good. I don't overwhelm people. You know, like
Mm.
a nice, attractive photo and a short Insta quote, and then you can put your entire poem in the description underneath it.
Yeah.
But I always make sure to interact with other writers. I tell them what I like about their poems. I'll leave comments. I'll give them likes because it's the process of interacting with people is what makes them want to interact with you.
Absolutely. That's
So
it.
that's always a good idea.
Yeah, that's how you gain people's attention. So, Robinson, I also want to ask you, is there anything that you'd love to share with the viewers about your poetry book and writing works generally that we couldn't mention in this interview and you just love the viewers to know?
Oh, absolutely. Writing is a process, and it's not just each book that's a process. I would even go so far as to say that writing is a process of processes. From the time when I was 15 years old and I first wrote a poem on a piece of notebook paper in my room, my dad had just got done yelling at me for something, and I didn't have anyone to express my emotions to. So I started on a piece of notebook paper at 15 years old in my room, and I went through this entire ego shedding process, and now I'm writing my either sixth or seventh collection of poetry. I've had short stories published in Dimension Bucket magazine, poems in the Stray Branch and the High Plains Register. I've accomplished a lot of things, and I would the whole cliche of don't give up.
Mm.
It doesn't accurately describe. It's not adequate. People can tell you, "Oh, don't give up," but it doesn't tell you what to do next.
Mm.
Sure, don't give up. Okay, I won't give up, but what do I actually do? How do I take action? And what that action is it's in the next poem. It's the same thing you've been doing, but it's also branching out and doing other things that you might be scared to do. I heard a quote somewhere that says, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not living right.
Mm.
Don't stay sheltered in your box, branch out and do other things and celebrate your successes, acknowledge your failures, but understand what the difference is between a success and a failure, and don't let the failures drag you down. It's highly important not to be dragged down, and be open, communicate with people, ask questions,
Mm.
and but understand other people's boundaries as well. I've gotten a lot of people that they'll ask a question, but they're intrusive about it. You know, we're all human beings. We all have to get along with each other,
Yeah.
and I understand your drive to succeed. I have the same drive to succeed. It's just there's certain ways of handling that. And so I would just say that's my process of not giving up. Just write the next poem.
Yeah.
Monica Wood also said one more thing. She said, you have to be willing to write badly. Not everything you write deserves to be published. Acknowledge that. Not everything you write is good. Acknowledge that. Get feedback, but write badly. It's totally fine to write trash. I wrote trash for the first 9 years of my writing career, and they're all still sitting over there on the shelf in my guest room.
Oh,
And I can break them out and realize how far I've come.
yeah.
So understand
Like a
where you were,
progress.
understand where you are,
Yeah,
and believe in where you're going to be.
that's great. That's fantastic. Vincent, I also want to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book like yours? What would you tell people in this category?
You have more than one option. Don't get too focused on it. I was, you were about halfway through your question, and I absolutely knew the first thing I was going to say.
Oh,
You have more than one option. You don't have to have somebody else publish you. You don't have to publish yourself. You don't have to publish poetry or fiction or any genre or any length or any subject matter. You don't have to, you can cuss if that's what you want to do. It's going to be more difficult for you, but you can cuss in your stories or your poetry. I would say the only the only real things that I would say that you're not allowed to do are to promote any group of people. I wouldn't see why anyone would want to do that anyway. I'm totally against that. But with very few exceptions, there are no limitations on who you go with or how you do it. Are some of them these processes better than the others? Absolutely.
mm,
But you don't have to do it in any certain way. I've heard of several instances where a famous book was rejected by dozens of publishers.
wow.
I believe Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, was rejected by dozens of publishers before
Absolutely.
it was finally accepted by somebody,
Absolutely.
and now it became a famous novel. And I've read it, and I can say if that book had come onto my shelf asking for publication, I would have rejected it too.
Wow.
but that's my opinion of the book. A lot of people love the book, and I'm glad that he was able to get it published. I read the book and I couldn't find anything that I really cared for about
Mm.
it. And so my other advice is that people tell you not to read reviews, and I completely disagree with that. So my advice to people who, if you have been published or you've self-published and you're getting feedback, read the feedback.
Absolutely.
No, but prepare to get hurt.
Yeah.
Prepare to get hurt. If you're not in a good mood that day, or you're sensitive, or you're hangry, whatever the reason is, it's too hot outside, not in the right mindset to get your legs cut out from underneath you, because eventually that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Don't read the feedback. But if you're in the right mindset to accept genuine feedback and positive criticism, then I would implore you,
To
please,
read it.
please, please read your feedback. Read your
Absolutely.
feedback. And people out there listening right now are going to absolutely disagree with me. But I insist on reading all my feedback, and feedback on books that they obviously didn't read. Since he wrote the feedback for this book, but I remember he called this teenage feel good garbage,
Well,
and I think he gave it a 2-star review. He called it teenage feel good garbage, which I don't understand, because spoiler alert, everyone was dead. And so I don't know what kind of person would feel good about everybody being dead in the book, but I'm not 100% certain he actually read the book, but I always thought that was, when I read it, I kind of just chuckled about it. But absolutely read your feedback, and don't get too stuck on a single process,
mm,
because you don't have to do it the way that people tell you to.
yeah, that's a great advice. It's something that is very popular among writing and authors, including myself. So, and I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, too, would love to utilize your advice. Now, Robinson, please tell us, where can we get copies of your book? On what platform are they available?
Oh, absolutely. I try to communicate with people as much as I possibly can, and I'm probably opening the door to a lot of things here. I try to help people. I
Mm,
try to help people, but I won't do the stuff for you. If you have a question, I I I wish I would have had more guidance when I first started out. That's why I came on the show, is because I wanted people to be able to hear my process, and to know what I've gone through to
mm,
get to where I am. And I'm by no means, I'm not famous, I'm not rich, but I'm successful. I'm successful. I'm willing to keep going, and I'm willing to explore this, and are willing to support me through this entire process as well. Uh, you can get you can get my books at my website. It is cjrobinsonauthor.com,
mm,
and there is they call it a hamburger menu. But on mobile, there's a hamburger menu. You can click on the menu. On your PC or your laptop or tablet, it should have a menu bar at the top. You
yeah.
can find the books by clicking books, and it'll take you straight to my books page. You can also contact me. Please sign up for my newsletter. I do send things out. I write blogs, so
Amazing.
I'm not a one trick pony. I don't just write the books. I write the books. I edit the books. I do the website. I communicate with people, and I try to do a lot of stuff. So I'm really involved in this whole process. You can also follow me on Instagram under the same name, CJ Robinson Author. And if you want to find me on Snapchat, I'm not that much involved with my writing on Snapchat, but I do post little clips and short pieces of poetry on my story.
Mm.
That one is That Lonely Poet. I'm on
Oh,
Snapchat as That Lonely Poet because
wow.
CJ Robinson author won't fit. It's too long.
Oh, that's great. That's fantastic. And I left a link to your website in the description below, and also a link
Thank you.
to purchase, where viewers can actually get a copy of the book in the description part of this interview. Thank you very much, Robinson, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just whenever, it was fun. It was fun. I thank you so much for having me on.